also find it hard to believe in an omnipotent God. They question why God would allow humans to cause so much evil and suffering if he had the power to stop them from doing so. Another problem relates to the idea that God is omniscient. This means God would have known about all the evil and suffering that would come from him creating the universe the way he did. Some Christians therefore wonder why he did not create the universe without this potential for evil and suffering. This suggests that because evil and suffering clearly exist in the world, either God does not exist or he cannot be omnibenevolent, omnipotent, and omniscient. Some religious people find that when they experience evil and suffering, it can present a challenge to their faith. They may reject religion as a result. What is the problem with evil and suffering for Christians? Christians believe in an omnipotent and omniscient God, so some find it difficult to understand why evil exists in the world when God has the power and knowledge to prevent it. Christian beliefs. The events in the last days of Jesus' life, including the Last Supper and Jesus' crucifixion, resurrection, and ascension, form the basis of many key Christian beliefs. These events are described in each of the 4 Gospels in the New Testament. What are the responses to the problem of evil? There are various Christian responses to dealing with the problem of evil and suffering. Some Christians believe it is pointless trying to understand why evil and suffering exist, as God's will is beyond human understanding. Others take a theoretical approach to tackling the problem and try to make sense of it using reason. Some Christians believe the presence of evil is an opportunity to respond in a practical and compassionate way. What is the biblical response? The biblical response suggests that people cannot understand why God allows evil and suffering to exist. Suffering is a part of human existence and enables Christians to demonstrate their commitment to God. The biblical response uses the book of Job, which is found in the Old Testament. Job was a devout and sinless man who led a good life. Satan convinced God that the only reason for this was that Job had a pleasant life, suggesting this made it easy for Job to be faithful to God. God decided to see whether this was the case and allowed Satan to test Job. Satan did this in several ways, for example, killing Job's sons and daughters and making Job sick. Although Job began to question God's goodness, he defended God to his friends, and when God heard this, he blessed Job. Additionally, the Psalms show that suffering is intended to be a part of life and that joy and suffering cannot exist without each other. They also show that suffering can bring Christians closer to God. What is the theoretical response? The theoretical response argues that evil and suffering are not God's fault. Moral evil is caused by humans' misuse of the free will given to them by God. Additionally, evil and suffering in this life are part of God's long-term plan, and people who suffer will be rewarded with eternal paradise. This is known as the veil of soul-making response. The world exists as a place for humans to develop their soul by being tested. What is the practical response? The practical response is to show compassion to people who are suffering, offer those people help, and trust that God will deliver an answer to the problem. An example of this is intercessory prayers, which are prayers asking for God's help for people in need. Jesus also taught that evil is something that can be fought, for example, by feeding the hungry and healing the sick. Christians can therefore follow the example of Jesus by working hard to tackle evil and suffering. For example, they can do this by setting up food banks, donating money to charity, and becoming doctors and nurses. What does the book of Job teach Christians about evil and suffering? Suffering allows Christians to demonstrate their commitment to God.